Brothers Grimm, Life and Work. The Brothers Grimm, Jacob, and Wilhelm, were two German academics and collectors who lived in the 18th and 19th centuries. They are best known for their groundbreaking work in collecting and publishing folk tales and other stories, which had become an integral part of global culture. The Grimm brothers were born in Hanau, Germany, in the late 18th century. They were two of 6 siblings, and their childhood was marked by tragedy, as their father died when they were young. Their mother was left to raise the family, and she instilled in her children a love of learning and a desire to succeed. Both brothers went on to study at the University of Marburg, where they were heavily influenced by the Romantic movement and its emphasis on folklore and cultural heritage. After graduation, they embarked on a lifelong career as scholars and collectors, working to preserve and document the rich traditions and stories of the German people. The Brothers Grimm traveled extensively throughout Germany, gathering stories and conducting research into folklore and language. Their journeys took them to numerous villages and towns, where they collected stories from local people, often recording them in their original dialects. They also visited libraries and archives, poring over ancient texts and manuscripts in search of forgotten tales and legends. During their travels, the Brothers Grimm encountered a vast array of people, from shepherds and farmers to scholars and aristocrats. They were known for their keen observations and ability to connect with people from all walks of life, and their experiences on the road informed much of their work. In addition to collecting stories, the Brothers Grimm also conducted research into language and dialect, as well as the history and traditions of the regions they visited. They were interested in the way that culture and language evolved over time, and their work is noted for its attention to detail and accuracy. Their travels and research culminated in the publication of their famous collection of stories, Grimm's Fairy Tales, which was first published in 1812. The collection includes stories that have become well-known classics, such as Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, and Hansel and Gretel. The Brothers Grimm faced many challenges in their career, including political censorship and the disapproval of many of their contemporaries. There were several factors that contributed to this. Firstly, the Brothers Grimm's work was considered controversial by some because it involved collecting and publishing stories that were often deemed too lowbrow or uncivilized for academic study. Some scholars believed that folklore was not a legitimate field of study and that the stories collected by the Brothers Grimm were of little value. In addition, the political climate of the time was also a significant challenge for the Brothers Grimm. They lived during a time of great upheaval in Europe, with the rise of nationalism and the push for unification of Germany. Their work collecting stories and folklore was seen by some as a threat to the social and political order of the time. As a result, the Brothers Grimm faced censorship and opposition from authorities, including the suppression of some of their publications. They also faced disapproval from some of their academic peers, who were critical of their work and the methods they used to collect and publish stories. Despite these challenges, the Brothers Grimm remained committed to their work, and their perseverance and dedication helped to establish the field of folklore studies as a legitimate area of academic inquiry. Grimm's Fairy Tales is a collection of stories compiled by the Brothers Grimm, Jacob, and Wilhelm, in the early 19th century. The collection includes over 200 tales, many of which have become classics of Western literature. The stories in Grimm's Fairy Tales are drawn from a variety of sources, including folk tales and legends from throughout Germany and other parts of Europe. The tales cover a wide range of themes and genres, from fantasy and magic to romance and morality. Many of the stories are familiar to contemporary audiences, including Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, and Hansel and Gretel, while others are less well known. One of the key features of Grimm's Fairy Tales is its attention to detail and authenticity. The Brothers Grimm were committed to preserving the original form and content of the stories they collected, and their work is noted for its accuracy and attention to historical and cultural context. However, the original versions of some of the stories in the collection were quite violent and contained mature content, reflecting the harsh realities of life in earlier times. In some cases, the Brothers Grimm toned down the violence and removed some of the more adult content in order to make the stories more appropriate for children. Today, Grimm's Fairy Tales is considered a classic of world literature, and its influence can be seen in a wide variety of media, from children's books to movies, television shows, and even video games. The collection remains a valuable resource for scholars and enthusiasts interested in the study of folklore, culture, and storytelling. Some of the best-known fairy tales from the collection include Cinderella, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, Rapunzel, the Frog Prince, The Golden Goose, the Bremen Town Musicians, Rumpelstiltskin Sleeping Beauty. Here are a few of the original folklore stories of the much-loved fairy tales, picked by the brothers. Cinderella. The earliest known version of the Cinderella story can be traced back to ancient Greece, where a story of a young girl named Rhodope was recorded by the historian Strabo in the 1st century BC. Rhodope was a beautiful young girl who was enslaved by a group of bandits and taken to Egypt. While working as a servant, Rhodope was spotted by the Egyptian king, who was enchanted by her beauty. He sent for her and made her his queen. The story goes that while Rhodope was bathing in the Nile, an eagle swooped down, snatched one of her sandals, and flew off with it. The eagle eventually dropped the sandal into the lap of the king, who was amazed by its beauty and determined to find its owner. He searched the kingdom until he came to Rhodope, who was identified by the sandal's unique size and shape. Impressed by her grace and beauty, the king fell in love with Rhodope and married her, making her his queen. In some versions of the story, Rhodope is said to have remained faithful to her Greek roots and is sometimes referred to as the rosy-cheeked Greek girl. While this version of the Cinderella story lacks the fairy godmother and magical transformations of the later versions, it still includes many of the key elements of the story, such as a beautiful young girl who captures the heart of a powerful ruler, and a lost item, in this case, a sandal, that serves as a crucial clue in identifying the girl. Little Red Riding Hood. The origins of the story of Little Red Riding Hood can be traced back to ancient folklore and tales from different cultures around the world. The Grimm brothers' version of the story is believed to have been based on an earlier French folktale called Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, the Little Red Cap, which was published in the 17th century. The French tale was itself based on older folktales from various European cultures, including Italy, where a similar story called La Fintanona, the False Grandmother, was told. Their story was first published in 1812 and tells the story of a young girl named Little Red Riding Hood who is sent by her mother to visit her sick grandmother, who lives in a forest. On the way, she meets a cunning wolf who convinces her to take a longer route to her grandmother's house. The wolf then goes to the grandmother's house, where he eats her and disguises himself in her clothes. When Little Red Riding Hood arrives, the wolf pretends to be the grandmother and eats her too. In the original Grimm version of the story, there is no happy ending, and Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother are not saved. However, in later versions of the tale, including some popular retellings for children, the story ends with a heroic hunter or woodsman who saves Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother by killing the wolf and cutting them out of its belly. Over the years, the story of Little Red Riding Hood has been adapted and retold in many different ways, in literature, film, and other forms of media. It has become one of the most enduring and beloved fairy tales in Western culture. Hansel and Gretel. There are some scholars and folklorists who believe that the story of Hansel and Gretel has its roots in pagan mythology, specifically in the myth of the goddess Hulda or Frau Holle. Hulda was a Germanic goddess who was associated with winter, spinning, and the hearth. She was said to live in a house made of gingerbread or cake, and was often depicted as an old woman with a kind heart who rewarded good children and punished bad ones. According to this theory, the story of Hansel and Gretel may have evolved from pagan tales about Hulda and her house made of gingerbread. Over time, the story may have been Christianized and adapted to fit the moral and cultural values of the time. For example, the witch in the story may have replaced the goddess Hulda as the villain, and the story may have been transformed into a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and gluttony. Other scholars believe that the story of Hansel and Gretel may have its roots in other pagan myths and legends, such as the story of the Greek goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone, who was abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld. Like the story of Hansel and Gretel, the story of Demeter and Persephone involves a mother who loses her child and goes on a journey to rescue her. While the true origins of Hansel and Gretel may never be known for certain, the story's enduring popularity is a testament to its power and appeal. It has captured the imaginations of generations of readers and continues to inspire adaptations and retellings in various forms of media. Rapunzel. There are several variations of the Rapunzel story in different cultures. but one of the most well-known is the Italian story of Petronella, which was first recorded by Giambattista Basile in his collection of fairy tales, the Penemarone, in the 17th century. The story is similar to Rapunzel in many ways, but there are also some notable differences. In Petronella, a wealthy couple longs for a child, and the wife becomes pregnant after eating parsley from a nearby garden that belongs to a witch. The witch agrees to spare the couple's lives if they give her the child once it is born. The couple agrees, and the child is named Petronella after the parsley. When Petronella grows up, she is imprisoned in a tower by the witch, who visits her by calling out, "Petronella, open sesame." Instead of Rapunzel, "Rapunzel, let down your hair." Like in Rapunzel, a prince hears Petronella's singing and falls in love with her. The prince eventually manages to rescue her, but not before the witch is killed and Petronella is temporarily transformed into a bird. There are other variations of the Rapunzel story in different cultures, including the Persian tale of Rudaba, the Norwegian story of Katie Woodenslok, and the Chinese story of Maiden in the Tower, among others. The Brothers Grimm, Jacob, and Wilhelm, are known for collecting and publishing a large number of traditional folk tales and fairy tales. While many of these stories are well known and beloved, they also collected a number of darker and more disturbing tales that may be considered creepy or unsettling. Here are a few examples. The Juniper Tree. This is a story about a wicked stepmother who kills her stepson, cooks him in a stew, and feeds it to his father. Later, a magical bird resurrects the boy, and he returns to life to reveal the truth of his murder. The stepmother is then crushed by a millstone. The Girl Without Hands. This is the story of a man who sells his daughter to the devil in exchange for wealth. The girl manages to keep her hands pure, but the devil takes them from her anyway. With the help of an angel, the girl is eventually reunited with her father and marries a prince. The Old Woman in the Woods. This is a story about two children who are abandoned in the woods by their parents. They come across an old woman who lures them into her house with the promise of food, but then tries to eat them. The children manage to outsmart the old woman and escape. The Robber Bridegroom. This is a story about a young woman who is engaged to a wealthy man who turns out to be a murderer and robber. She is saved by her sister, who warns her of his true nature, and a group of vigilante women who catch and execute the robber. The Singing Bone. This is a story about two brothers who go hunting, and the younger one kills a wild boar. The older brother murders the younger one to take credit for the kill, but the murder is eventually revealed by a singing bone from the boar. These stories often feature dark themes, violence, and sometimes graphic details, which may be considered creepy or disturbing. However, they also often contain lessons or morals, and are a reflection of the culture and beliefs of the time in which they were collected. The Brothers Grimm published their dark and sometimes disturbing stories in their famous collection of folktales and fairy tales, which was first published in 1812 under the title Children's and Household Tales, Kinder- und Hausmärchen in German. This first collection included also many of the stories that would later become classics of children's literature, such as Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella, and Little Red Riding Hood. The book was a huge success and has been translated into more than 160 languages. In addition to their work on the children's and household tales, the Brothers Grimm were also scholars and researchers. They published books on linguistics, mythology, and Germanic culture, and they worked on a German dictionary that would eventually become the authoritative reference work for the German language. The Brothers Grimm were also involved in politics and social activism. They supported the idea of a unified German state and were active in the German student movement of the early 19th century. They also advocated for the preservation of Germanic culture and folklore, which they saw as an important part of the country's heritage. Despite their successes, the Brothers Grimm faced many challenges in their lives. In their personal lives, the Brothers Grimm were known for their intellectual pursuits and their commitment to scholarship. They never married, and they lived together for most of their adult lives. They were known to be very close and shared a deep bond of friendship and mutual respect. Jacob Grimm died on September 20, 1863, in Berlin, Germany, at the age of 78. He had been in poor health for many years and had suffered a stroke several months before his death. Wilhelm Grimm outlived his brother by 6 years, dying on December 16, 1859, also in Berlin, at the age of 73. He too had suffered from poor health in his later years, The cause of death for both brothers is not entirely clear. However, it is known that they both suffered from a variety of health problems throughout their lives, including respiratory issues and heart problems. After their deaths, the Brothers Grimm were buried in the same cemetery in Berlin, although their graves were initially unmarked. In 1898, a monument was erected to honor their memory, and their graves were finally marked with simple headstones. Today, their graves are a popular destination for visitors to Berlin who are interested in the history of literature and folklore. Brothers Grimm are remembered as two of the most important figures in the history of literature and folklore. Their stories have inspired countless adaptations and retellings, and their legacy continues to influence the way we think about language, culture, and storytelling. And that concludes our journey through the lives and work of the Brothers Grimm. We hope you have enjoyed learning about these two remarkable men who left an indelible mark on the world of storytelling. Their enduring legacy continues to inspire and entertain people of all ages, across cultures and generations. From the humble beginnings of collecting folk tales, to the profound impact they had on the German language and culture, the Brothers Grimm are a testament to the power of imagination, creativity, and the human spirit. Thank you for watching, and we hope you will continue to explore the world of folklore and fairy tales.